Hi, this is Marcy Hronik from Canadian Equality Consulting. I am jumping on here to record another quick Canadian Equality Consulting coffee chat. Today, I just wanted to share with you and discuss domestic violence and what you can do as an employer to recognize these warning signs and how you can help and how you can support your employees that may be going through domestic violence. So this is part one of the conversation. In this conversation, I will talk to you about the issue itself, the warning signs, and then also introduce some tangible tools and steps you can take in order to support your employees. And there will be part two of a second video released later this week that will go into further detail about workplace supports that are available and different options that you could present to your employees. So we know that women in all of their diversity, particularly women of color, care workers, stay-at-home moms, women that are already in cycles of abuse, trans women, disabled women, are all facing exceptional challenges with their health and well-being right now. We know that physical distancing measures from COVID-19 have dramatically decreased safety and support systems as well. We've seen domestic violence homicide rates spike. Most recently, last Monday, a 24-year-old woman in Calgary was murdered by her partner. Alberta has one of the highest rates of domestic violence in the country. And it's no coincidence that our economy is highly gendered. And we have a culture of hypermasculinity here. Now, in the first 6 months of 2019, the number of women and girls murdered each month remained steady at 10 to 12 killings per month. That's according to Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability. On average, one woman or girl is killed every 2.5 days in Canada, which has been a consistent trend over the last 4 decades. And that is now increasing due to COVID and the economic recession that we're in. So before we dig deeper, what is domestic violence? You often hear people talk about domestic violence. Sometimes you hear intimate partner violence. Sometimes you hear family violence, gender-based abuse, emotional abuse, but domestic violence. So despite having all these different words or terms, domestic violence is the umbrella term that encompasses all of that. So when in doubt, say domestic violence, because it includes intimate partner violence, it includes gender-based violence, it even includes financial abuse, senior abuse, teen dating abuse, emotional abuse, family violence, the whole gamut. And it covers this type of abuse across the entire lifespan of a person. But to narrow it down a little so that you understand kind of the limitations of this definition of domestic violence, even though it's the umbrella term, it includes relationships that are 1, intimate, and that doesn't mean sexually intimate, that just means intimate and close, 2, dependent, and 3, trust. So it's any type of relationship where there is that closeness, there is a form of dependency, and there's trust. And the purpose of the relationship in domestic violence situations is control and power. So the one person, the perpetrator, wants to have control, verbal, physical, emotional, you name it, some sort of control and exert some sort of power over the other. So the perpetrator can be anyone. So we often hear when we talk about domestic violence, the typical perpetrator, when you try to imagine one in your head, would probably most likely be a man. And the victim or the survivor most likely is a woman, right? If we imagine that. And that is, most commonly the case. Women account for 8 in 10 victims killed by a current or previous spouse or intimate partner in Canada. But it's important to know when you're detecting or trying to detect domestic violence in the workplace that the perpetrator could be anyone. It could be a woman, it could be a man, it could be a same-sex couple, it could be a non-binary person. You know, you have to keep your mind open in order to notice these warning signs. Now, specifically in Calgary, where Canadian Equality Consulting is primarily based, domestic violence is not predominantly clustered in a single neighborhood or a region of the city. And this is most common for most cities in Canada. So you often think, oh, that must just be in a certain segment or a certain neighborhood. But no, it is everywhere. There isn't a neighborhood in the city that doesn't have it. In Calgary, we know that there are 2 domestic violence calls to Calgary Police Service, CPS, every hour. But we also know that only a quarter of people self-report domestic violence to police or call the police for that. That's according to Stats Canada. So in reality, it's more like at least 8 calls every hour, if everyone reported, should be happening to Calgary Police. And 80% of those that experience domestic violence also experience it in the workplace. So it's not something contained in their home. It's something that they carry with them and happens to them in the workplace as well, whether that be through their partner texting or calling incessantly throughout the workday, or being stalked at work. So an example, I attended a webinar recently by CEGES, which is a peer support domestic violence center in Calgary. And I'm going to link to them and share resources from them. And a lot of the information I'm sharing with you today is from them, and same with in part 2. So I want to thank them for their knowledge, and they are the experts in this area. And an example that they gave on domestic violence and how it translates in the workplace that is really effective and quite shocking, I wanted to share with you. So there was this, and they know this person, but essentially an example that they've seen is if a person, for the sake of this example, let's make it a woman, receives a lot of flower deliveries from her husband or her partner at work. And, you know, this is very visible to her and her colleagues, and leads her colleagues to, you know, make comments and say things like, oh, wow, you must have such a great relationship. You must have a fabulous marriage. This is so sweet. What a great guy you have. And what this does is it limits her and prevents her even more from confiding in her colleagues or seeking help or support. Because if she does, their first reaction is to be shocked and think, no, how could he be doing that? He's such a nice guy. He sends you all these gifts and flowers all the time. He's so considerate, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of abuse is invisible to many people. It could be financial manipulation. It could be controlling the way you dress or who you talk to and interact with. But essentially, domestic violence is dozens of these little manipulations at a time that build and build over time, making the person feel trapped, isolated, and helpless. So now let's talk a bit about how COVID-19 and this economic recession have impacted domestic violence, specifically in Canada. So the physical distancing has, we know, dramatically reduced the safety and support systems for women or any type of victim or survivor. And I use the term survivor for those that are still with us, and the term victim from those that have been killed or murdered due to domestic violence. So we know domestic violence has already started to spike exponentially, and it typically spikes in times of economic downturn and in emergencies and crises. And we're experiencing both of those right now. We know that shelters have started or already run out of space, and some are checking women into hotels now. Now, it's important to know that only 8% of surviving women from domestic violence access a shelter. Only 8%, and we don't even have capacity for those 8%. That's pretty poor. So those that are full and that are now putting women in hotels, you know, in theory sounds great. That's innovative. That's a good idea. But imagine being locked and like trapped in one room and with one bathroom in a hotel for months. And imagine if you have children. how challenging that would be and how stressful. So China is a few months ahead of us in terms of their COVID-19 journey. And reports have shown that they've been able to show that domestic violence there has increased threefold there during this pandemic. We don't have the numbers yet for the exact spike of the increase in Canada yet, but it's being tracked by our shelters and support services. But again, that's only those that have actually reported. So there's a lot that we are missing. And this economic recession, the data will be released on Friday by the government, is anticipated to show that this economic recession is overwhelmingly affecting more women than men. Because there's more women in the healthcare sector and there's more women in the service sector. So not only has COVID-19 disproportionately impacted women, coupled with the economic recession that is disproportionately impacting women, coupled with the fact that domestic violence increases during these, during crises and economic recessions, and this is being compounded because it's happening at the same time. So before I go into what you can do as an employer or a colleague in the workplace, let's just quickly touch on mass shootings. So almost all have been found to be rooted in misogyny. And one of the most common predictors of future violent behavior is domestic violence. This includes the most recent shooting in Nova Scotia. It began with misogyny and the assault and attempted murder of the killer's girlfriend. Often these mass shootings are reported and described by governments as senseless, and that the killer has some form of mental illness, which in reality often excuses their actions as completely out of our realm of control. Or then we implement, greater gun controls, which is also good, but kind of missing the root cause here. We need to recognize that the underlying attitudes and beliefs that tolerate and normalize acts of violence against women have incrementally led us down this path. And this is a much bigger problem of entitlement and toxic masculinity. So despite knowing all this and having this knowledge and these facts being shared, we continue to discuss mass shootings as if they're gender blind or gender neutral, with no mention of violence against women. And sometimes I think, why do we do this? Why is media reporting it like this? Why are governments not even acknowledging this as if it's completely invisible when the data and the evidence is there? And is it because looking at this as a larger systemic, societal, and cultural problem too big, too abstract, too hard to wrap our heads around is how we, is this even in our realm of control? How could we begin to solve this? But it is solvable. It is 100% solvable. And at this point, I want to share with you, because you may be wondering, what can you do to solve this? So as an employer or as a colleague in the workplace, how can you spot domestic violence? It's important to also know when we talk about this that 80% of people experiencing domestic violence tell an informal support first. So before they call the police, before they look into any sort of formal reporting, they'll often tell an informal support person first. So that could be a colleague, that could be a friend, a family member, something like that, someone that classifies as an informal support. And it's so incredibly important how you react and respond to that, because how you react and respond to that as an informal support determines whether or not they will seek more help or look for options or end up reporting it. And it's important to know that what they choose to tell you as an informal support is only the tip of the iceberg. It is very unlikely they will share the full story with you, or the most humiliating or degrading aspects of the abuse that they're experiencing. And so it's important to know that what they share with you, even if it, you may think, oh, that's not that bad or whatnot, that is, highly likely to be just the tip of the iceberg. So what can you do in a workplace or as an employer? Remember the acronym REAL. So recognize is R, E is empathize, A is ask, and L is listen. So start by recognizing. So check in often with employees and colleagues, whether that be on Zoom calls, by text, by email, you name it. Just check in with people casually, and ensure that you're asking them some thoughtful questions about how they are, how they're doing. How are you coping? How are you and your partner coping? Things like that. They may not always be able to respond if you're asking via technology or via their phone. Try to ask via work phone, not personal phone, because there can be technology abuse where abusers will download an app or malware onto their partner's phone and monitor the interactions that are going on there. So try to use more security protected work emails or work phones if possible. And what you hear in a Zoom call or a meeting, that it could be out loud and their partner could be nearby listening, doesn't tell you much. So make sure you check in personally. Also ensure that you're providing your employees with healthcare insurance. So it can be life-threatening not to have access to healthcare during this pandemic, not just because of COVID-19, but also from domestic violence injuries, or even being able to access medical supports. E, empathize and believe. So believe them, number one. Trust what they are telling you. It is so incredibly difficult to share if you're experiencing domestic violence. So the number one thing that you need to do as well is believe them and trust that this is their reality, right? And they're telling the truth. And understand that for them, leaving an abuser is the most lethal time for violence. And there are a multitude of health and safety reasons why people may choose to stay with their abuser. For someone that's never experienced domestic violence, you may think, just leave, right? Or if someone confides in you, that's the first thing you might tell them to do. But understand that this is a calculated response and trade-offs, and that they're going through in their mind in determining what to do and who to tell and what to do or how to access supports. And there very well are a number of really good reasons why they may choose to stay with their abuser for their health and safety of themselves or their children or their pets or things like that. So just be aware of that. Okay, the A in real is ask. So make sure that you are asking privately. Are you doing okay? How are you and your partner holding up? You can say, I don't mean to intrude, but how are you and your partner holding up? Are you doing okay? Do you feel safe? What can I do to support you right now? Or if you witnessed something or heard something, you can say, I heard or saw what happened. Are you okay? And what can I do to help you? And just leave it at that and see how they respond. Then the L is to listen. So pay close attention to their language, to your language, in the language that you respond with, and your body language. As an employer, you are responsible to know what options are available for people if they're experiencing domestic violence. And part 2 of this coffee chat, I will share more options so that you're aware of them. But make sure, look those up. Look at Say Yes, and I'll link them here. I'll link a couple other options and supports that are available in Canada that you could share. But what you need to do is not tell that person what to do after they disclose to you. It is more important for you to provide them with options and let them have the control to decide what to do. So you need to be able to give them back that control over their life to choose their own option. And lastly, aside from the acronym REAL, I've also added at the end, just be an ally. So think about, do some self-reflection. Have you ever turned a blind eye to emotional or verbal abuse? How about controlling behavior? Have you ever laughed at a sexist or misogynistic joke? And realize and think back to come up with that. Have I? And think of situations, and then realize it is time to stop that behavior. So we cannot shift or move the dial without actively and being active in stopping this. So it's one thing to just stop doing that yourself, and that is excellent, but we still will not shift the dial if we don't take an active role in stopping others from doing the same. So if you see this behavior, if you and your buddies are laughing at a sexist joke and you see them all laughing and you stop, as an ally, talk to them, raise it up, like have that conversation, have that difficult conversation, please. And do not turn a blind eye. So make sure that you talk to your children about this as well, not just your friends and your buddies and your family members. And anytime you see people treat women or other marginalized populations as lesser than, speak up. And please also share this video. Share what you will commit to doing to stop this behavior and this toxic masculinity and toxic culture that we all live in right now. Share in this video's comments what you will do, what you pledge to do to stop this. To stop this behavior, and any other ideas you may have on how you can broach this subject in the workplace. Options that you know of, please also share those in the comments so we can, share them with everyone. And stay tuned, because I will share more options for workplace supports in part 2 of this coffee chat video. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to hearing from you. Have a great day.